What is going on? It is Nate the Game Guy coming back with another video at hand, and today I want to talk to you guys about problems when collecting for the Xbox One. Now, the Xbox One is one of the cheapest game consoles that you can collect for, and I have a video all about that you can check out right here if you guys are interested in. And of course, being a cheap video game console to collect for, there are some advantages to it. However, we're going to take a look at in this video some of the problems that you can encounter when collecting for Microsoft's 8th gen console. I won't be covering every issue that you can face when it comes to the console itself and collecting for it, but I will discuss a few issues that do pop up in my mind when I think of collecting for the Xbox One. So without further ado, let's dive right into this video subject, take a look at some details when it comes to collecting for the Xbox One with the problems associated with it right after the intro. Alright, so the first problem that I want to discuss when it comes to collecting for the Xbox One is that if the console is set to factory settings or if it's been reset to factory settings, you are going to need an internet connection to basically make the console function. That can be a big problem in the long term, and for people that, don't have an internet connection or don't really have good internet, essentially you will have this piece of hardware that is essentially useless if there is really no good internet connection or internet connection at all. Of course, that can be a problem in the long term, especially when Microsoft will eventually shut down the servers for the Xbox One. Then what happens then? What happens to all the games that you've purchased for it, all the games you've collected for it? That can be a huge problem. So yes, there are some advantages to collecting for the Xbox One. After all, it's very cheap. It's very easy to get into. But if you are looking at the long term, I think, that is a big issue to consider and think about when it comes to collecting for Microsoft's 8th gen console. Now, of course, while being on the subject of internet connectivity when it comes to the Xbox One is also the games. The games that came out for the Xbox One, there's a good chunk of them. Thankfully, not all of them, but unfortunately, when it came to the 8th generation of gaming, it was notorious for having games that will come out broken on launch. They need updates in order just to make the game playable, function, whether it's in the single story campaign or online. And unfortunately, this has been a problem that has crossed over into the 9th generation of gaming. Of course, being a console from the 8th generation of gaming, the Xbox One is easily affected by this. After all, for those that do remember the launch of Master Chief Collection back in 2014, that had a disastrous launch, and it took a very long time for 343 to get the game to be even playable for many users online. Now, I also do remember as well, there was also an Assassin's Creed game that came out that same year too. Forgive me because I am not remembering the title because I just simply do not keep track of the Assassin's Creed series. But that game was also a very notorious title for the bugs that came with it during launch. Unfortunately, when the server shut down one day for the Xbox One, that could be a serious issue for a lot of games. After all, the 8th generation had a lot of broken games that came out during launch, and of course, this was a console that was one of the top tier contenders for the 8th generation of gaming, so it is something to consider and think about when it comes to collecting for the Xbox One. Another issue that's worth discussing when it comes to collecting for the Xbox One is disc rot. So what is disc rot? Disc rot is essentially what the name suggests. It means that your disc is beginning to rot away, either because of poor manufacturing from the manufacturer from when the disc was made, or it was put into an environment where it gets very, very humid. Humidity is not good for discs at all. Or it's placed in some place where the environment it's constantly fluctuating. So it gets cold in the winter, it gets hot in the summer. Ideally, you want to put discs in room temperature conditions, right? And unfortunately, all discs are susceptible to disc rot. And unfortunately, disc rot is not reversible. Once it is there, it's just going to continue doing its thing. Everything is affected by it, whether it is music CDs, DVDs, games. Of course, since we are talking about the Xbox One is no exception because the games are on disc. I will not go into every single detail in this video when it comes to disc rot and all the problems associated with it, because I already have another video about that you can check right here, where I do go into more detail about disc rot and everything that's involved with it. But when it does come collecting to the Xbox One, it is a disc-based console, so unfortunately disc rot is an issue that is associated with it. So if you are collecting for the Xbox One and you are concerned about the long-term storage and use of your disc, you are probably going to want to know a thing or two about disc rot and take those things into consideration. Now, of course, another thing that's worth considering too when it comes to collecting for the Xbox One is the lack of exclusive titles on the console. Of course, being a video game console, you're obviously going to want to pick up some games to play for it. And of course, you're going to want to get some games that you'll want to play, hopefully, right? And unfortunately, in my opinion, I consider the Xbox One to have a not so great selection when it comes to exclusive titles. There's just not very many exclusive titles on the console, me personally, especially when you compare it to PlayStation 4, which was clearly the Xbox One's competitor during the 8th generation. After all, there was God of War, Ghost of Tsushima, Drive Club, Killzone Shadowfall, and so many other exclusives. And meanwhile, what exactly was Microsoft doing when it came to exclusive titles for the Xbox One? Sure, there was Master Chief Collection and the Gears games and Forza Horizon, but unfortunately, I think if you were to line up a list of all the PlayStation games compared to the Xbox games to see which console had the most exclusive titles, I think PlayStation beat Xbox by quite a bit. Unfortunately, if you are going to be collecting for the Xbox One, that is clearly an issue that you're going to face. Yes, there are still plenty of third-party titles that are worth playing on the Xbox One. After all, there's Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six Siege, and of course there are the Dirt games, and The Witcher 3, and Metal Gear Solid 5, The Phantom Pain. There's plenty of great third-party title games that you can play on the Xbox One. But unfortunately, when it comes to the exclusive department, I don't really think the console really has that big of a selection of games to choose from, which of course can cause a little bit of some not as great of an experience for you when it comes to collecting for the Xbox One. So just another thing to keep in mind. So I do think this is an issue that isn't talked about enough when it comes to collecting consoles and keeping consoles, and that is the thermal paste. So what is the thermal paste? So thermal paste is a paste that's placed inside of the console, and that is used to help protect the CPU and the GPU from overheating and getting permanently damaged over time. Obviously, thermal paste is important because it helps protect, well, the CPU and the GPU from overheating, along with other nasty stuff that happens when those things are overheated, right? Thermal paste is important. So every time a console is put out, especially with modern consoles, thermal paste is placed inside of them before they are sold as new. And preferably, if you're buying them refurbished, I hope the person that refurbishes them or company that refurbishes them does put thermal paste inside. That's important, especially if you want a working console for a long time. Of course, when you are talking about older consoles, right? Especially older consoles that use thermal paste, there's a pretty good chance that the thermal paste is getting worn down inside. And of course, thermal paste doesn't last forever. So sometimes you may need to get the thermal paste replaced inside of it. How do you know that you need to have the thermal paste inside of it? Well, you could basically play Surgeon and open up your console and take a look to see if the thermal paste is completely gone after watching some YouTube videos on how to take apart your console. Or you could take it to somebody that, knows what they're doing and all that wonderful stuff. Chances are, if you have a console that's, well, not exactly new and has been around in your collection, or you've known to be around for a good while, it probably wouldn't hurt to get your console checked out to see if there's still some thermal paste inside of it. Because after all, if you care about the long-term preservation of your video game collection, your consoles, and all that, you're gonna want to make sure that you've got some thermal paste inside. After all, it certainly would suck if one day you try to turn your console on, it's just not working, and you find out, oh, well, it's just overheated inside, everything's permanently damaged because, well, the thermal paste is all gone. So that is something that I think is worth thinking about when it comes to collecting for the Xbox One. A lot of modern day consoles do deal with thermal paste. Of course, even as early as Xbox 360 does have some thermal paste as well. Don't know about the original Xbox, but I will say around the 7th generation is when you really began to saw the thermal paste being used in game consoles. So definitely keep that in mind. It's very important, especially if you do care about your consoles and the long-term preservation of your consoles. Hey guys, thank you so much for checking out my video. Please be sure to check out these videos here, and here. After all, I post a lot of content when it comes to game collecting tips, and other video game related subjects. So be sure to keep an eye out every Monday and Friday where I upload consistently, and I'll be seeing you guys next time.